My name's Guy Hamilton Smith, and this talk that I give, this one in particular, is really a talk sort of in two parts. Sort of the first part is kind of about my kind of journey, my story, but the second part is really about what I've learned from my journey and the lessons I've sort of learned about advocacy along the way. But, so that's just kind of like a very broad roadmap. But I want to start with the time in my life when I felt the most free that I'd ever felt in my life. And that time was actually when I was handcuffed in an interrogation room on the 5th floor of the police department in Lexington, Kentucky. It's ironic that the time in my life I felt the most free, I was actually the least free that I had ever been. This was back in 2006. I was 22 years old. I had a very different life than I have now. I was actually in graduate school for clinical psychology. I had been with my girlfriend for 3 years. I lived, this is actually a shot of the apartment tower that we lived in. We lived in this apartment, well, this balcony that leads into an apartment. It's on the 17th floor. And I had just told the police the truth. And that's why I felt free. Of course, for anyone who has any, criminal defense lawyers always say you should never talk to the police, and you should certainly never tell the police the truth. But I did. I had been turned in by my girlfriend. She had found on my computer a lot of pornography. For my teenage years, I had a really compulsive relationship with internet porn. And I essentially just downloaded everything I came across. And one day, I was probably about 16 years old, I came across an image of a girl. She's probably about 15, 14. And I started downloading that too. And, one day I wanted out of my relationship with internet porn, and I didn't really know how to get out of it. I would try to stop, and I would find myself going back to it, and I was too afraid to ask for help, but then help came. And I say I felt free because for the first time in my life I was able to get honest. I got honest with myself. I got honest with, a pair of detectives. But also shortly after that, my friends, my family, my employers. I lost a lot from my arrest, but I also gained a lot too. I was held accountable for a crime that I committed. I wish I could say that it was an accident, that I didn't know, that it was planted. I guess I could say all those things, but that would be a lie. That wouldn't be the truth. The truth is I committed a crime. I was held accountable. And I'm grateful for my experiences. Actually, a lot of people find this hard to believe, but I'm actually still friends with my girlfriend at the time who turned me in. I realized that I don't think that she did anything wrong. And as painful as parts of this journey have been, I'm extremely grateful to her for what she did. Initially it was really scary. I didn't exactly know what was going to happen. I didn't know what my family was going to say, my parents. But they let me know very early on that they loved me, that they supported me, that they were there for me. That was important. I remember the next day after my arrest at arraignment, and that's like your initial appearance in court, when they read your charges and your release conditions to you. In Fayette County, Kentucky, it was being held at the district courthouse, and they had these rows of pews, sort of like in church, and they were all full with people waiting for the cases to be called. And they called my case, and I went to the front of the room where the judge said Commonwealth of Kentucky versus Guy Hamilton Smith, read my charges. And as soon as he read my charges, which is something like possession of material portraying a sexual performance by a minor, I felt the air in the courtroom change. I could feel everyone behind me staring daggers. And sure enough, when I turned around, I saw it on their faces. It's these sea of anger and disgust and judgment. And I put my hands in my pockets, and I went to just try to make myself as small as I could and get out of this room as quickly as I could when the judge was done with me. And I didn't hear him. I didn't really even know where he was. I was too focused on just trying to get out of this room. But I heard him. And what I heard was my dad. And he was right next to me. And what he said was, get your hands out of your pockets and keep your head up. So I had family support. I had friends that supported me, that let me know that I was still loved and cared for. And also going through this legal process, it was terrifying. For anyone in here who's been through the legal process, you know it's terrifying. You don't know what's going to happen to you. For me, it was also, in addition to being terrifying, because of course it's terrifying, it was also really interesting. All these lawyers making these arguments about, search and seizure and due process and effective assistance of counsel. I didn't know any of these things meant. I just knew I was really interested. And I asked my lawyer one day after hearing, can you be a lawyer and have a felony conviction? And he said, sure. I got a lot of friends who have felony convictions that are practicing attorneys. So I went out and I got the LSAT book, which is like the law school entrance exam, and I started studying for it. I did really well on the LSAT, but at this point, I actually still didn't know if I was going to prison or not. I didn't know what was going to happen in my case. And I didn't go to prison. I just got a suspended sentence, plus in Kentucky, it's just a flat 25-year requirement of registration. But once I found out I didn't go to prison, I wasn't going to go to prison, I decided, well, I'm going to apply to law school. And, I didn't really think I was going to get in, but I did. On the letter of intent, when you have, apply to law school, they ask you, well, why do you want to be a lawyer? I couldn't say, well, it's a family tradition of mine, because it was never on the radar. So I had to say, well, I had my experience with the legal system. And honestly, like I said, I didn't really expect to get in, but I did. And this is me on the national moot court team. Probably doesn't mean much to anyone in here, but it was a big deal back then. And I was told that I needed to excel in law school. I needed to really outwork everybody else because of my past. I needed to demonstrate that I wanted this. And so I did. I was on the national trial team. I was on the national moot court team. I published a law review article. I won an award for my Cali Award, which anyone in law school might know what that is, for Innocence Project externship that I did. And but I went to law school because I wanted to learn criminal defense work. And I was told that if you want to learn criminal defense, what you have to do is you have to do one of two things. You have to either work for the prosecutor's office or the public defender's office. And I went to law school because I wanted to be a public defender. I was like, okay, I've got this. They have the first year of law school, they have you get your first internship. The public defender's office announced their interviews. I was like, I'm shooing. There's no way they're going to say it. You probably know how the story ends, right? But there's no way that they're going to say no to me. And we had our interview, and I, gave them my whole spiel. and they said, "Thank you very much, we will never be hiring you." It is too much of a political risk for us. And I remember, when I got this news, I was actually like openly weeping in property class because I was like, well, shit, how am I going to learn criminal law? And you remember I say, where you work at the prosecutor's office. I got so desperate, I actually applied at the prosecutor's office. And I got an interview at the prosecutor's office too. And I actually did really well in that interview. But they didn't hire me either, because it turns out they have a policy against hiring people they prosecute. I mean, I guess that's a fair policy. So I sent this email to the webmaster of the Kentucky Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, which is like every state has an association of criminal defense lawyers, and it was like 3 in the morning, and I hadn't slept, and had probably about 4 Red Bulls, and I was freaking out. And I was just like, please, I need some kind of unpaid internship, something in criminal defense. You don't have to pay me, I'll do anything. And this webmaster just forwarded this email to their entire listserv, their entire membership. So every criminal defense attorney in Kentucky got this 3 a.m., not proofread, panicked. Yeah, that's the exact look I had on my face too when I realized what was happening. This is my job application, right? And I'm like, no, I'm never going to get a job in criminal defense. But 2 days later, I got a phone call, and it was from a criminal defense law firm in town. And they said, come in for an interview. So I show up, put on my nice suit, I got my writing sample, and this guy strolls into the office wearing cowboy boots, jeans, a Hawaiian shirt, he's got a mullet. I'm just painting the picture for you here. He calls me a kiss-ass for wearing a suit. The interview is, do you drink beer? Do you play golf? Congratulations, you're hired. And, I said, I really appreciate your offer, but before I say yes, you've got to know something about me. And I tell him my story. I tell him everything I just told you. And he says, well, I really appreciate your honesty, but I got to check with my partners. I'm not sure if this is something we can really, I don't know. And, I said, I understand. Thank you. I left the office that day thinking that I'm never going to, hear from him again. But, I wound up working there for about 9 years. That's actually the guy with the mullet and the cowboy boots. That's him right here. Although he didn't have a mullet there anymore. So we did criminal defense work. We did state and federal criminal defense, trial and appeals. I also did death penalty mitigation work. And this is actually this is one of our clients who it was a really bogus murder prosecution, but that was right after we got an acquittal and we just walked out of the courtroom. They taught me a great deal working there. They taught me, how to do good legal writing, how to do good research, how to investigate people's cases, but really more importantly, how to tell people's stories, how to tell client stories. One of my specialties at the office became sentencing. When it comes time to go before the court for sentencing, you have to tell your client's story about why should we show this person any mercy? And it became that became one of my talents at the office. But they also supported me when it came time to sit for the bar exam. They said, when you graduate law school and when you sit for the bar, we want to hire you. We want you to work here. And I should say that at this point, I was not an advocate, by the way, for any of these issues. I was not public with my story. I actually wanted nothing to do with any of this. I mean, no offense. But if I were to be an advocate for this stuff, that would mean people would be like, why do you have such a strong opinion about this stuff? It must be because you're a sex offender, aren't you? And then that was like my big fears, that people would find out. I didn't want people to find out. I just wanted to do good criminal defense work, keep my head down, get through the bar. And so I graduated law school, and then in order to sit for the bar, this may surprise some people, but in order to practice law, you have to have good moral character. I say it may surprise some people because attorneys generally aren't known for their good moral character. In law school, I would joke to people, I would say, I'm really not, like my close friends, I would say, I'm really not sure it's going to make people hate me more, that I'm a sex offender or that I'm an attorney. Anyway, so we went through this whole character and fitness process with the Office of Bar Admissions, and the long and the short of the story is that they said, well, we're not going to let you take the bar exam for as long as you're on the registry, which, remember, I said in Kentucky is a 25-year requirement. And my lawyer, who's representing me pro bono, just because he believes in my case, he said, we're going to appeal this. The facts are on our side. The law is on our side. There's no way we can lose. And so we go to the Kentucky Supreme Court. We were all briefed up after much work, and we're just waiting on a decision. And we're waiting, and we're waiting, and we're waiting, and about 8 months go by. And this is like a long time if you're waiting on something really important. It's like, did I just spend the last 3 years of my life and $150,000 in debt for nothing? Anyway, one day the phone rings, and it's our receptionist, and she goes, it's an AP reporter on line 1 for you. And I'm thinking to myself, shit. Like, I know enough to know it's never good when an AP reporter is calling the office looking for me. And, he said, are you the same Guy Hamilton Smith that the Kentucky Supreme Court just said can't take the bar exam? And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I do remember that's how I found out. We got a decision, finally. And it was actually unanimous, like we had predicted. It was just unanimous in the other direction. Remember I said I wasn't really public, at this point. I had been open to my friends and my family. My phone started blowing up, and it was friends letting me know, you're in the local media. I'm thinking, okay, it's just going to be a local story. Then, you're in the Washington Post. You're trending on Fox News. You're in the Daily Mail, which is like, that's like, I have British tabloids. I made the British tabloids. The next day, I'll say this before I go on. I'll say that I told my boss, the guy with the mullet, he didn't have a mullet then. Anyway, I told him what the reporter had just told me. And I'll never forget. He obviously knew how much pain I was in. And he said, well, you know what you're going to do? You are going to get up tomorrow, and you're going to come into the office, and you're going to go to work, because we've got work to do. Anyway. But that next day, when I was standing in line to get coffee, there is my case on the front page of the paper. I'm on the front page of actually every newspaper in Kentucky. And so I'm out, right? I'd been going to church at that point for a few years. And before I started attending church, I went to my priest. And I asked him if it would be okay if I came to church, because I didn't know if I would even be allowed in. I think a couple weeks before I actually started going to church, there was this big fight in the editorial page in the local paper about should sex offenders be allowed to go to church. Anyway, I told my priest, I told him again everything I told you all. You know, I'll never forget, without missing a beat, without blinking an eye, he said, well, of course, you're welcome. You're no different than anyone else. And so I started going to church. But I didn't tell anyone else. I didn't tell any other people in church. I mean, I worshiped, I volunteered, I made relationships. I had a community. And so that Sunday, after this, I got a phone call. It was my priest. And he wanted to just let me know that people were talking about my story, that they knew. I'm out. And he didn't tell me he didn't tell me what I should do. He just wanted to let me know. And I had to make a choice. Do I stay here and hide? Or do I show up? Well, I showed up, and I wasn't really quite sure what I was walking into. When I walked through the double doors to this church, I just did my very best not to make eye contact with anyone, and I made a beeline for my seat, which I normally sat at the very front of the church. You know, because no one likes the front row, right? You just kind of like within arm's reach. But that's where I sat. And I sat down and I closed my eyes. And before too long, I felt someone sit on either side of me, flanking me. And I remember thinking, okay, well, this is a security team that's come to drag me out of church. And I opened my eyes, and it's two of the most matronly, motherliest, blue-haired old ladies of the church. And I remember thinking, that's a really strange security team. And one of them leaned over to me, and she whispered, "We've got your back." And I know. And the part of the service, which is like the peace. And for those who don't know, that's the part of the service where you go up to everyone in church and you shake hands and you say, "Peace of the Lord with you and also with you." Well, people kept coming up to me, hugging me, and telling me that I'm loved, I'm in the right place. I've told this story a lot. It still tears me up because I'm really pretty much just kind of a wretch. I don't know a lot about God. I don't know a lot about any of that. But what I do know is that if there is such a thing as the love of God, I experienced it on that day in that church. That actually turned out to be a very pivotal moment for me. Because at church they had a prison ministry. And they wanted me to get involved with that. Because I had this story. And I'd actually known about prison ministry, but I didn't want to get involved with it because, of course, if I did that, then people would know about me, and, well, now I have nothing to lose. So they actually were going to have a conference that fall about, reentry issues. And they wanted me to give a presentation, not only really about my story, but about the registry and reentry when you're on the registry and the issues that you face. And so I said, okay. And as this conference got closer, I realized I needed to prepare like a PowerPoint, and I needed to kind of put all these materials, like academic materials together, and I had all these books. And all these books had titles like, sex offender laws are bad, and, why sex offender laws are not protecting us. And I mean, that was like the general theme of all these books, right? So I don't know about anyone else in here, but I can never really get any work done at home. I always have to go to a coffee shop or someplace. And so I had all these books, and I didn't want to pull them out of my bag and set them there on the desk. Because people would be like, what? People want to talk to me about them, right? I don't want to talk to anybody about this. I'm out, but I'm not this level of out at this point. And I almost actually don't pull out these books. And but I say to hell with it, and I set them there on the table next to me. I get to work, and sure enough, it's not even 10. I don't even think it's 10 minutes later after I start working. But this young woman, she comes up to me and she wants to start talking to me about these books, and I'm thinking to myself, God damn it. But I really couldn't have known it at the time, but. It turned out that was going to be my wife. Who's actually, she's sitting right over there, and she does a great job putting up with all my shit. And I'm not just saying this because you're here, but you've changed my life in a lot of ways. What I realized is that I was really afraid to love and be loved by others. And a lot of that came down to the registry. And what I realized and learned is that it's trauma. That the registry is trauma. Being on it is traumatic. It's traumatic for family. And maybe most of the rest of the world is going to say, you deserve this. You committed a crime, you caused harm to someone, you deserve this trauma. And, I'm not here to say whether or not what anyone deserves or doesn't deserve. That's all above my pay grade. What I am here to say is that it is trauma, and you have to honor that. And it's true on the registry being labeled a sex offender. It's sort of like your narrative being told for you, right? Some people are lawyers or doctors or butchers or janitors, and what do, right? Well, when you're a sex offender, what do? I guess you put on your shoes and you go out into the world and you go sex offend. That's the label, right? That's what you're supposed to do. And of course that's not true. You may have committed a crime, but if you're not out there committing crimes right now, then it's not accurate, but it's traumatic. And so what being in this relationship taught me is you have to learn how to tell your own story again. How to be the author of your own narrative. And so she encouraged me to be more vocal about my advocacy and about my work. And so I started to do that. So sometimes when we're at home, she'll be on her phone, and I'll ask her, hey, honey, what are you doing? And she'll say, well, I'm on Facebook. I'll ask her, was it fun? She'll say, no. I'll go, well, why are you on Facebook? And sometimes she'll say, well, because you're not allowed to be on here, so I can say whatever I want to about you. And you can't say anything back. So my best friend and I in law school, we came up with this idea that if they weren't going to let me take the bar exam, what was I going to do with, you know, that fancy law degree and the $150,000 in loans that I took out? And what we arrived at was that I still had two things that they could not take away. And that was my education and what's called Article 3 standing, which is fancy legalese for these laws affect me personally because I'm on the registry. And because they affect me personally, I can't represent anyone else, but I can represent myself. And there was a law in Kentucky, this was before Packingham, but it was a law that basically said you can't, if you're on the registry, you can't use any kind of social media, and also you have to turn over all your online identifiers, whatever those mean, whatever that term means. And anyway, I was the plaintiff in a federal civil rights challenge, alleging that this law was unconstitutional on First Amendment, so freedom of speech ground, but also because this law that said you have to turn over your online identifiers was it was incomprehensible, that you could not understand what the law required. And if you can't understand what the law requires of you, how are you supposed to comply with it? And we won. We won. This was back in October of 2017, finally. And the day of the decision, I don't know if anyone here knows Reddit, what Reddit is, but it's a social news site. I went on there and I did this thing called Ask Me Anything. So I just went on this site and I said, my name's Guy Hamilton Smith, here's my story, ask me anything. It went a lot better than I thought it was going to go. And I also sent my first tweet, which brings me to this. I'm going to unpack this a little bit. This, by the way, is me taunting the state police on Twitter. I don't recommend this. By the way, they're not known for their sense of humor. So after I won this lawsuit, they kept sending out, the Kentucky State Police kept sending out their verification forms. And on the form, they were still asking for what are your online identifiers? The very thing the federal judge said that's unconstitutional. You can't enforce that. So I wrote on their form, I said, I'm not providing this to you. See a copy of the enclosed federal court order. Put it back in the mail to them, but before I did, I took pictures of it, and I put it on Twitter. I said, hey, at Kentucky State Police, catch me on Twitter. How about that? And I know that they saw it because they liked it. That was like the most ominous like thing I've ever. Anyway, like I said, don't recommend doing this. However, nothing bad happened, for which I'm, so, you know, again, Kentucky State Police, thank you for having a good sense of humor in this instance. But it turned out this is actually really pivotal for me. Accessing the world of the marketplace of ideas. Justice Kennedy in the Supreme Court Packingham decision, he said something along the lines of access to the world of ideas, even for convicted criminals, and in some instances, especially for convicted criminals, may provide the most rewarding means, especially if people seek to reform and pursue a lawful and rewarding life. And that certainly seemed to have borne out in my case. Getting on Twitter has led to me getting connected with criminal justice reformers I had no other way of contacting outside of social media. That led me to get connected with, at the time it was Harvard Law's Fair Punishment Project, but it's now, I guess, sort of the Appeal. I've been doing, I guess you'd call it freelance journalism, writing about, not really so much my story, but writing about these issues when it comes to law and policy, and what makes for good law and good policy. It got me my current position. I'm the legal fellow at the Sex Offense Litigation and Policy Resource Center at the Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law. And it's also brought me to a bunch of conferences to talk about these issues, to talk about my story. It's also, there's one thing in particular I'll plug, which is the Just Leadership Fellowship, which is a leadership development program for people who have gone through the justice system and now look to translate that into advocacy. Anyone in here who has justice involvement, and you want to pursue that path, I would highly encourage you to apply. And feel free to talk to me about my experiences with it. So anyway, that pretty much brings us, I could probably stop right now. Maybe some of you wish I would stop right now. And just, we could say, wow, it's a cool story. He's been able to really, turn some adversity to his advantage by showing up and by leaning into it. But I'm not done yet. As I said, this is sort of a talk in two parts. And so this is the second part. This is really about advocacy. What I've learned and how I view advocacy when it comes to this particular area of law and culture and policy. I sort of see advocacy here as a three-legged stool. So you can kind of picture in your mind what a three-legged stool looks like. You got three legs. And what happens if you take one of those legs away?
You don't have reason.
Yeah. Well, you're not sitting on that stool. So you need all these legs. And so what is the first leg of this stool that we call advocacy? Truth. Facts. Science. Statistics. The recidivism rates, the reoffense rates, all that. We all know it, right? That's why, one of the reasons why we're all here, we all know that the recidivism rates for people convicted of sex offenses are much lower than commonly believed. We thought, or at least I thought, when I first started doing this work, was that, we're just going to tell them. We're going to go to the court, and we're going to tell them that they got it wrong. That they got it wrong in Smith v. Doe. But it's not frightening and high. That we're going to tell them something like this. The sexual psychopath laws are based on the belief that persons who commit serious sex crimes have no control over their sexual impulses and will repeat their crimes again and again, regardless of punishment or other experiences. A few cases of this kind, to be sure, are reported. The question is whether sex offenders differ from other offenders in their rate of recidivism. Three types of evidence indicate that sex offenders have a low rate of recidivism compared with other offenders. We're going to tell them that, clear this whole mess up, you're going to be home by dinner. Right? Well, this was published in 1950. This is 53 years before the Supreme Court decided Smith versus Doe. Facts alone are not going to save us. So, the second leg are the lawyers, the constitutional arguments, the briefs, the legislation, the legal front, right? This is a decision from the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. Does v. Snyder, which is a decision most of you are probably at least a little familiar with. But it was a federal court opinion that declared much of Michigan's sex offense registry to be unconstitutional. Now, this opinion was really notable for a few reasons. One reason was just the legal holding itself, and the level of court that it came from. This is just one step below the United States Supreme Court. But also, the judge who wrote it, Alice Batchelder, is one of the most conservative judges on the Sixth Circuit. But it's also the tone of the opinion. What she said. She wrote that Sora brands registrants as moral lepers solely on the basis of a prior conviction. It consigns them to years, if not a lifetime, of existence on the margins, not only of society, but often, as the record in this case makes painfully evident, from their own families, with whom, due to school zone restrictions, they may not even live. It directly regulates where registrants may go in their daily lives, and compels them to interrupt those lives with great frequency in order to appear in person before law enforcement to report even minor changes to their information. It's like a shotgun blast. It's powerful. This is from a headline last year. Courts deemed Michigan's sex offender registry unconstitutional. 2 years later, nothing's changed. And the ACLU has gone back to federal court to get another federal court order to get the state of Michigan to comply with the first federal court order. So that's not to say that nothing's changed, but the point is that if we rely on constitutions and laws and courts, well, they're not going to save us either. So what's the third leg? A judge named Learned Hand, which is a pretty good name for a judge, gave a speech in Central Park in New York in 1945 to a group of newly naturalized American citizens. And in this speech, he said, "What do we mean when we say that, first of all, we seek liberty? I often wonder whether we do not rest our hopes too much upon constitutions, upon laws, and upon courts. These are false hopes. Believe me, these are false hopes. Liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies there, no constitution, no law, no court can save it. No constitution, no law, no court can even do much to help it." If you want to change the law, you can't just change the law. You have to change people's hearts. And there is no fact, there is no study, there is no statistic, no constitutional argument that will do that. There's only one thing that can. Your own. Which brings me to a part of my story I haven't really talked about yet, but it's probably the most important part. Most of you probably have no idea who this person is, but without him, I would not be here doing this work. Without his family, I would not be here doing this work. This is Ryan Loskarn. And I first became familiar with Ryan when in 2014 he was arrested for the same crime that I was arrested for back in 2006. He was the chief of staff for a United States senator. He was a rising star in conservative political circles. That was when I first heard about his story, and then I next heard about his story about a month later when it was reported that he had taken his life in his parents' home outside D.C. Like me, I had parents that loved me very much. Like I'm sure many people in here do. And I should go back and say that, this balcony, that the apartment I lived in, it was 17 stories up. Well, I came home from school that day, and I walked into the apartment, and my girlfriend was there. And she told me what was about to happen, that the police were going to be on their way. And I went out onto that balcony with every intention of jumping. And I didn't. I don't know why I didn't, because I believed my life was over. Instead, I came back inside and I sat down and I lit a cigarette and I cried and waited for the police. So I came back inside and Ryan didn't. But I got this idea because what Ryan's parents did is they took the letter that he left behind and they published it online. You can still read it. And I read his letter. And his story is my story. But the difference is I came back inside. And I got this idea to write to them as parents and to tell them my story and to try to offer them some kind of comfort. And I was sort of dimly aware that this was kind of insane, right? They probably didn't want to hear from me, a total stranger. But I felt compelled. And so I wrote the letter and I put it in the mail. And sometime later I got a response. And thus began a friendship, I guess you would call it, between me and Ryan's parents. And so we would write letters back and forth. They would send me books. I wound up inviting them to my wedding. Well, our wedding. You were there too. But the reason I bring this up is because I would like to share with you a letter that I wrote to Ryan's mother, Gay. And this was actually the night before I was supposed to give my presentation at that prison ministry conference. Dear Gay, I have been working on putting together my presentation for the prison ministry conference and trying to figure out exactly what it is that I want to say. I know that I want to educate people about these issues, and I've got all that. The facts and the figures aren't too hard to present. They're not that hard to understand. It's not tough to figure out that the biggest problem that people on the registry face when re-entering society are housing and jobs. I ran through my presentation yesterday and it all just seemed so clinical. And I guess that's part of it. It's hard to make statistics and statutes all that appealing. And then I got to Ryan and how I'm going to talk about his story. And a passage from the note that he left behind keeps sticking out to me. That because of his fall from grace and the enormous amount of attention that was put on the same, that the details of his shame would be forever preserved. That there would be no escape. In looking at the timeline of it, I realized that we were both struggling with that same notion at the same time. As it was in January of 2014 that I got the media attention I received over the bar, and then Googling myself, realized that there was no escape from it. It would be a forever thing, and it will be. Honestly, had I had to confront that same realization at the time of my arrest, I'm not sure I can say whether I would have come back in from the balcony. So I'm thinking about how to talk about reintegration and re-entry for something like this. What does that mean? What does that really mean? I mean, we talk about housing and jobs and being a law-abiding member of society, and I had a nice little spiel all worked up about how all those things are important. But it's bullshit. Or it's not bullshit, it's just missing the point. It's shame. I'm thinking about Ryan, and I'm thinking about how circa 2013 I was living a very small life, worried about what would happen if people found out about me and my past. And society tells me and told Ryan that we have no choice in the matter, that we have to be ashamed and afraid, and that we're going to carry a brand to prove it, an indelible brand for the information age. And I believed it, as Ryan did, as I'd surmise most people in this situation do. How can you not? So I read of Ryan's passing and had my crazy idea to send you a letter, and we started communicating. I then had the opportunity to take part in a documentary, the opportunity to initiate a lawsuit, the opportunity to give that talk to those high school kids, the opportunity to give this presentation. And once we win the lawsuit, I'm planning on being a lot more public via social media. I had high-minded ideals that perhaps if I step out of my shell, perhaps I can do something for the next person who's sent into the fire. Perhaps I can do something for the numberless, nameless people who trudge in present day the same dark and anonymous paths that Ryan and I shared, and all those whom our actions caused harm to. I'm going to save lives, I told myself, egotist that I am. And I guess I told myself that in part to combat the fear. As part of my presentation is going to be talking about a 2014 case where a couple of neo-Nazis murdered a person on the registry and his wife, and then at sentencing stated child molesters don't deserve to live. I think about that, and I think to myself, I'm probably not doing any favors to my lifespan by being out and open about this. And maybe that's true. I've never been very good at predicting the future. But what I'm trying to write out, and what it is I really want to say about reintegration and Ryan and me, is this idea of shame keeps popping up. And the words from Ryan's letter. He used the word, shame. And I wrote out shame kills and looked at it for a while, writing and rewriting what it is I'm trying to get at. And something occurred to me that I never expected, that shot me through the heart, and that's the reason for this long, rambly letter. I'm thinking about how shame can kill so fast, faster than bullets, because it can move at the speed of 24-hour news cycles and tweets and internet searches, that it can become so overwhelming to a person all at once that, like Ryan, one feels that there is no way out but to take your own life. But it kills slowly, too. And when it does kill you in such a fashion, in a way it's much more insidious, because you find that despite being dead, you're still walking around. You're still talking to people and going to the store and laying in bed at night. You're still alive, but not living. You're cut off from everyone, and even the very light of the soul is threatened to be snuffed out by it. You're a husk, managing to fake it until, perhaps mercifully, your body gives out. Me, I've known shame so long that its presence was assumed to be normal in whatever form it took, from being mercilessly taunted as a young boy to trying to numb everything out with porn and sex and video games, to the fallout from my arrest and conviction with and media attention from the bar. Shame is something I would wake up with in the morning and go to bed with at night. So I'm finding something. That slowly as I begin to step out onto this stage, to show up, to commit to telling the truth, to being open and honest that these scales of shame are slowly falling away. That I'm beginning to not care that this is a forever thing and beginning to wrap my arms around it. To turn this place of low light that society expects me to reside in and turn it into a garden. To take the toxic shame that's supposed to number my days and turn it into grace. I started on this path of being open because I saw it as a duty to others. A duty that Ryan and you and your family showed me that I had. That I should try, if I could, to not let shame claim another life. But shame had claimed mine from the start. The last life I expected to be saving was my own. So I want you to know it. To know that, as I wrote in my first letter to you, that Ryan's death was not in vain. That what he and you and your family have given and left is playing out for me on a personal level in ways in which I could have never anticipated, in which I am only beginning to understand the enormity of. Thank you for everything. Maybe there are consequences to doing this work. I can't guarantee that there aren't. But I can guarantee that there are consequences for not doing it. Not just personal consequences. But this is the third leg. And until me, you, your loved ones, your friends, your family start doing this work, until we start doing it all together, none of this is going to change. So you're supposed to always end a story or a pitch with some kind of an ask. And so what I'll tell you is, in law school, one of my favorite classes was litigation skills, where they teach you how to, all the stuff that you see on Law and Order, right? The opening arguments and cross-examination and closing arguments, and I loved all that stuff. And my professor was a federal prosecutor. And despite, and I worked for the law firm at that time, so we were sort of like natural enemies in the legal arena. But despite that, we got along great. We hang out after class, and we just shoot the breeze. And one day, the topic of sex offenders came up. And he said, you know what we ought to do with sex offenders? We ought to take them all. We ought to line them up. We ought to shoot them. And, my first thought was, I hope you're not armed. And I don't think it was that night, but I did eventually tell him my story. I told him why I went to law school. I told him that when he said that we should line them all up and shoot them, that he meant me. And it completely changed his mind. Several years later, actually, we had a federal trial with him, and pulled my bosses aside. And he said, I really want to commend you all for hiring him, giving him the job. He's going to make an amazing attorney someday. Now, do you think, if when he said that, if I would have said, well, the recidivism rates for, sex offenders is actually much lower than commonly believed. You know, I mean, do you think that would matter? I mean, just think about your own experiences. Has that ever mattered? Has that ever changed anyone's mind? I'm like, well, of course. So here's my ask. My ask is for everyone in here to be an advocate wherever you can. In my experience, the most effective advocacy is personal advocacy. And that's when people know you, and they know your loved one, and they realize that you're just like everyone else. You're just a regular human being. And I'm talking to everyone in here. You don't think I am. You don't think I'm talking to you. I'm talking to everyone. So I need your help. I need your help to do this work. Thank you for your time. We have some time if anyone wants to ask questions, but you're all cut loose. Like, you know, you don't have to stay, but if you want to, I'm here for at least another 10 minutes or so. Yeah.
So, what can I do as an individual to help out on the process? What do I do?
I think just be a decent person, be transparent, treat people well. You know, when you have the opportunity, like I had the opportunity with my professor to be like, to take that risk, do that. I mean, there are, almost 1 million people, roughly. I mean, there's some controversy about that number, but if there's almost 1 million people and then their families and everyone takes those risks where they can, then I think that starts to change things. So I think it's really just about being a decent person. That's been my experience. Yeah.